I'm going to talk about the Scandinavian online debates about the refugee crisis. And I will talk about them as arenas for discussions about who we are, or in other words, how the participants in this comment sections on the Norwegian, Swedish, and Danish newspapers' Facebook pages express different understandings about what it means and what it should mean to be Norwegian, Swedish, and Danish when they were responding to and discussing articles about the so-called refugee crisis in 2015. So when I'm talking about the comment sections, I'm talking about the comments beneath the postings of articles on the open Facebook pages of the newspapers, like you see here. And I view these as discursive arenas for informal citizen-to-citizen communication. So what can be studied on these pages is the informal, unstructured talk that people get involved with often without no clear aim. Because seemingly many participants sort of stumble into these debates when they've seen the newspaper's post appear in their newsfeed, and it seems often that they just sort of stumble into the debate. They have something to say, and often they haven't even read the article, just the headline. So it should come as no big surprise that the communication that we encounter here do not live up to deliberative standards that we often evaluate the public debate after. But it rather resembles the more informal, everyday-like talk that we as normal citizens have with each other. And these debates are also filled with what we could call incivilities. It's a lot of name-calling, it's a lot of ad hominem attacks and misunderstandings. But there is also something, not all of the debate is bad, so to say. I think studying these comments can inform our understanding of the public deliberation on immigration today. As argued by scholars both of deliberative democracy, such as Jane Mansbridge, to name one, and of rhetoric, such as Gerhard Hauser, so they argue that such informal, everyday-like conversations can be of significance for opinion formation, political knowledge, identification, interest, and engagement in political issues. So in this presentation, I will present some preliminary findings from my project, and here I will focus on the September material from the comments on 3 different pages here. So the material is not about Alan Kurdi, but it's from the same week as the photos of Alan Kurdi. And these photos, just to have them sort of as a backdrop for the debates that I'm looking at, they were seen as sort of an eye-opener that would change the debate and get us to act. Both journalists and participants in the comment sections viewed these images as a necessary eye-opener that would make us aware of the urgency of the situation, that would change both the debate and perhaps also attitudes, and that would make us act to change the situation. So, but what actions should be taken was not that often mentioned in these comments here. So I will not talk more about these images, but I will talk about 3 other issues, one in each country, that received massive attention in the comment sections right after these images were published. And these cases are different, but so they can't really be compared, but as we will see, there are some similar features in these issues. So in Norway, this was the articles about the hotel owner Petter Stordalen who let 50 refugees stay at his hotel at Oslo airport. And this was to help the Directorate of Immigration and the police, who were not capable of registering all of the asylum seekers who had arrived at once in Oslo. And the first article about this was published by Aftenposten on Facebook, together with the text, "Tonight the first asylum seekers move into one of Stordalens hotels. Price tag, 650 kroners per night," so around 65 euros. And the second article was posted together with the text, "The 50 asylum seekers who arrived at the hotel were treated as normal guests. I will not send a bill," says the hotel director. And then the next day, they posted the article. "The comment sections almost boiled over when we posted the article about the refugees who moved into Stordalens hotel yesterday." So generally, people were upset that so much of the taxpayers' money was being spent on housing the refugees in hotels. Why not something cheaper? And they were often compared to other weak groups in Norwegian societies, such as old, homeless, and sick people. And the hotel owners' efforts to help them were often also criticized for being just a PR stunt. Those who actually had read the articles, however, they knew that the 65 euros was the cost price for the hotel, and that Stordalen would also not send the bill, but cover these costs himself. And many of these people praised his good deeds in these articles. So from Sweden, the material I'm going to talk about today are the debates on the articles about the campaign I am sharing, Jag delar. And this was a campaign in which this newspaper, Dagens Nyheter, they had gathered 100 well-known Swedes, such as this was writers, athletes, Zlatan was there, musicians, actors, politicians, and so forth, to stand up for humanity and to distance themselves from hate, threats, and racism. That's what the campaign page said. So here I found two posts about the campaign and containing lists of participants, and then one editorial written by the chief editor, Peter Wolodarski, about why this campaign was important, and one op-ed piece written by one of the authors who participated in the campaign, and where she explains why she chose to participate in this campaign. And in these debates, many people were suspicious towards the campaign, calling it PR goodness, fake engagement, and many were also thanking these celebrities for taking a public stand on the issue and argued that their actions could inspire others to take action. And then in the Danish comment sections, the week after the photos of Alan Kurdi, there weren't really any similar cases to the ones from Norway and Sweden. But as we will see, this sort of, it sparks the sort of same debates as the other two. So this is one single news article about 170 refugees crossing the German border into Denmark. And this caused a lot of Danes to write welcome in the comment sections. And it also made many Danes angry and worried about the Danish welfare system, the Danish culture, and the security in society. And many described the act of welcoming these refugees as naive and as a form of irresponsible goodness, and argued that Denmark had a responsibility to take care of their own before they could help anyone else. Okay, so even though these three issues are different, and they're also different newspapers, Facebook pages, and they also have a lot of, they invite three different debates, but the discussions about them often address the same main questions. How do we meet those who are coming? And what implications do their arrival have for our society? So the discussions about these articles are to a large extent about the defining values of our society and how we act in accordance with these and how we look after and protect these values. So they are basically about who we Norwegians, Swedes and Danes are and about who we should be and who we should not be. Yeah, so I would say that these comments then usually perform functions associated with epidactic and constitutive rhetoric, that is the formation and performance of political identities and community, and also with defining the situations and what implications this situation has for the community. So in my material, I see that around 10% of the comments in the Norwegian and Swedish comment sections and 26 in the Danish comment sections are concerned primarily with defining the situation. And in all three countries, both of these, two different understandings were mainly voiced, and they were pretty evenly distributed. So it's defined either as a crisis for us or as a crisis for them when the situation is defined. So what is interesting is to look at how these two definitions of the situation are articulated in the text. So the posts who define the situation as a crisis for them, they are in all three countries concerned primarily with describing those who are coming as refugees fleeing from war, terror, and death. And these posts typically describe the situation in the in Syria and other countries in the Middle East, and they underscore the fact that people do not want to leave their country unless it's dangerous to stay there. And they also often emphasize the risks of crossing the Mediterranean and in unsafe boats. And argue that no one would take such chances unless what they're fleeing from is more dangerous. And this was pretty similar in all three countries, or in all three other debates. And the posts defining it as a crisis for us, on the other hand, try to establish an understanding of the refugee crisis as something that poses a threat to the economy, security, or culture of our own political community. And when I say our own or we and stuff like that, I refer to Norwegian, Swedish, and Danish community or society. So in the Norwegian and Swedish comment sections, the arrival of refugees were first and foremost seen as a threat to the welfare state and the possibility for taking care of the sick, old, and poor people. And the phrase our own in these debates often also include refugees or asylum seekers who already had resident permits. People, for example, say that we have to secure refugees already in the country housing before we can accept any more. So in this way of defining the situation, the immigrants who are coming are often referred to as welfare migrants and not real refugees. And there are also some comments in the Norwegian and Swedish material describing those who are coming as cultural and religious threats, but then they are not really said to be threats to the Norwegian or Swedish society, but rather to Europe. And in this understanding of the situation, also modern values such as freedom of speech, democracy, and women's rights are emphasized as important Western values that are threatened by the coming of others who are described as culturally different. In the Danish comment sections, the arrival of refugees over the German border is often described as a threat to the welfare of ethnic Danes. So in Norway and Sweden, they said our own, which also included refugees already in the country most often. But here it was explicitly said ethnic Danes. They used the term, it was used many times. And the arrival of refugees is seen not only as posing a threat to the welfare of Danes, but also to the culture and security of the country. Yeah, they are described both as welfare immigrants, but also as cultural and religious threats, as potential terrorists, to a much higher degree than in the Norwegian and Swedish comments. And also the crisis seemed to be more urgent in Denmark. The word invasion was used several times. The situation is sometimes compared to the German invasion of Denmark in 1940. And the old and sick Danes are not just facing harder times as they are in Norway and Sweden, they are going to lose everything, it is argued. The Danish flag will be cut into confetti, some say. And some participants state that they're going to lock their doors tonight, just to give a few examples from the Danish debate there. So what we see, particularly in the Danish comments, but also in the Norwegian and Swedish, is that when the crisis is defined as a threat to the economy, often a distinction between us and them is made, in which this we have to take care of our own before the others can be helped. So we see that there are, discourses of othering are used to reshape majority-minority relations and to argue against accepting refugees. And often not even argue, but just to maybe create a fear of the other. And that the receiving countries here, the members of the receiving countries are here often constituted into a people who share the same identities, the same values, the same interests. And the nation becomes sort of a community in which all members should feel a responsibility to help their fellow citizens. And this othering is also commonly used when the situation is defined as a problem for the security and the culture of society. And here the refugees are often described as others with a different culture and a different set of norms that would make it difficult and possibly dangerous to try to integrate them into our society. Yeah, and sometimes these others are described as criminal or terrorists who threaten the security of the receiving country's citizens. Yeah, so we see that not all agree on how to understand the situation. Some define it as a crisis for us, and others argue that it is a crisis for them. And in doing so, both sides often constitute a national we, either who have a moral obligation to help those in need, we have to help, or a moral obligation to protect and help our own. We have to help our own before we can help them. So how is this we described? Well, a great share of the comments in these comment sections to these three issues are concerned with defining who we are. And in order to examine what definitions of our own society that are given, I have identified the most commonly praised and criticized values, attitudes, and actions, and I have examined how these values are articulated. Are they, for example, presented as something we have to act in accordance with? Or as something that we have to protect? What explicit definitions of the community are given? For example, we Norwegians are, or the Swedish society is, and so forth. And what implications are the refugee crisis said to have for this society? So based on this, I have identified some prominent ways of constituting a Norwegian, a Swedish, and a Danish self in this material here. So I have, of course, simplified it a bit and also made these categories to make it a bit clearer and easier to follow. I'm not sure I'll be using this in the actual dissertation, but here are at least some thoughts on how the Norwegian self and the Swedish self and the Danish self is constituted here. The Norwegian self is mainly constituted in two ways, as a people of good deeds and as a people of fake goodness. So in the constitution of the Norwegian self, as a people of good deeds, generosity, volunteer work, wish to help, and good deeds are emphasized as typically Norwegian values. Suspicion and skepticism towards good deeds are criticized for being petty and expressions of envy. Egoism, greed, and ingratitude are criticized and characterized as un-Norwegian values. And the Norwegian self is also constituted as a people of fake goodness by asserting that many of the people who are doing good are doing this not out of goodness, but to be seen as good by others. So the will to help refugees is seen as a show-off in which Norwegians wish to present themselves as good to the rest of the world while ignoring their own weak groups, such as sick, old, and drug-addicted Norwegians. Yeah, and then the Swedish self. It's mainly constituted in two ways, as a people of failed goodness and as an open and humane people. So in the Constitution of Sweden, as a people of failed goodness, a view of Swedish immigration and integration policy is promoted as driven by sentimentalism, naivety, and stupidity. The supporters of a liberal immigration policy are described as participants in a goodness competition, which has led to failed integration, causing huge problems for the Swedish society. Furthermore, political correctness is often criticized, and democracy, freedom of speech, gender equality, and peace are praised as Swedish values that need to be protected, and to which the failed goodness regime and the immigrant population pose a threat. And in the constitution of Sweden as an open and humane people, Sweden is portrayed as a responsible nation that displays solidarity with the rest of the world. Values such as humanity and empathy and anti-racism are presented as typically Swedish values that are threatened by a cold mentality that gains currency in the contemporary Swedish society. Private initiative, as well as initiative from celebrities and politicians, such as the ones in the I'm Sharing campaign, are praised and seen as important to inspire others to help. Swedes opposing a liberal immigration policies are constituted as immoral, cynical, and racist. And the rise of anti-immigration attitudes is viewed as a threat to the Swedish openness and described as thoughtless and ignorant. And then the Danish self is constituted as a welcoming people and as an irresponsible people. So the constitution of the Danish self as a welcoming people is primarily articulated in form of a direct response to the news about the refugees crossing the border into Denmark. Welcome. The Danes are here often constituted as a warm and welcoming people with enough space in both their hearts and in their country to accept many more than the 170. The inhospitality of many Danes is often criticized in terms of shame, and many apologize on behalf of the Danes who are not as welcoming as themselves. And the Danes who are not as welcoming as these here are often constituted as ignorant, narrow-minded, cold-hearted persons who lack humanity and empathy. It's very, in the Danish debates, at least in this case, it's very harsh language, often on both sides. And the constitution of Danes as an irresponsible people is primarily articulated by creating a distinction between us and them. So the majority of the Danish population are constituted as an irresponsible people who, in the wish to help others, have neglected their own. So tending to and caring for other Danes is seen as the most important action. And the neglecting of Danes' own sick, poor, and old is described as a form of self-hatred, which has gained currency in the Danish society. Okay, so this was just to give you some impressions of what I'm working on, and what I sort of want to show you by showing you this is that these comment sections contain a lot of epidactic rhetoric. It's not, they don't usually discuss political matters. They often don't even refer to political issues or politicians or the question is very seldom what should we do about this. What is often expressed here is about values and about who we are and who we should be and about who we should not be. And some actions and attitudes are praised and emphasized as important for the community, and others are critiqued and often disapproved of. So in this discourse, as people express their ideas about what their political communities are and should be like. Yeah, so I guess this might not be so surprising when we think about what type of articles that I've looked at here, because these are articles about refugees who are actually coming to the country, and articles about welcoming them in a certain way. So in the articles about drowned or suffering refugees, such as the debates about the Alan Kurdi photos, we see that expressions of emotions are prominent to a larger extent than in these debates. But also in the debates about the Alan Kurdi photos, we see that a lot of the comments are about who we are and who we should be. And I think it will be interesting to also look at the comments posted to articles about specific policy or political decisions and see how they differ, or if they differ from these debates here. So yeah, these exchanges that I've looked at today, they are often moralistic, condemning, and polarizing. Often an us versus them is made, not only between us and them, understood as Norwegians, Swedes, Danes, versus the refugees or asylum seekers, but also between us who are good or right and them who are evil or wrong. And the willingness to listen and try to understand people with viewpoints differing from one's own is very low. Rather, people support those they agree with, and they tell the other side to be ashamed. They call them petty, stupid, egoistic, and so forth. So clearly, the presence of epidictic rhetoric in this comment sections does not only produce positive outcomes, and from a normative perspective, I guess we could wish to reduce the extent of such rhetoric in the public debate. The presence of such rhetoric in the comment sections, as well as in the public debate about immigration in general, I guess, is nevertheless a fact. So studying it, I argue, can inform our understanding of the public deliberation on immigration today. So what people express in these comment sections are some ideas about and ideals for their own society. And being exposed to these ideas and ideals as readers of the comment sections and also active participants, I guess can influence the participants' own conceptions about their own political community. It can influence the way they look at how fellow citizens, it can influence the way they look at fellow citizens, and it can also influence the way they feel that they are looked at by others and how their own opinions are valued. So in the end, I guess this could influence people's attitudes and judgments on how the issue should be solved politically. I think that was it. Yeah. Thank you.